This is a review of Chapter 11 titled Survey Research. Surveys are used to describe characteristics of a population and is therefore often also referred to as descriptive research. It is primarily quantitative because the researchers, after they have collected the surveys, uh, assign numerical values to the answers so that they statistically can analyze the answers that they have received. It typically investigates such things as people's attitudes, opinions, behaviors, experiences, or other characteristic of the population or specifically of the sample that we draw to use for our survey. Typically, we cannot survey the entire population and we therefore instead use a sample of respondents. When possible, we attempt to use probability sampling, which I previously also have referred to as random sampling, which means that people who participate in the survey have the same probability or equal probability of being selected as every other participant. This is important in terms of being able to make inferences about the population whom the respondents represent. It can be used in a descriptive manner, it can be used to investigate relationships, or it can be used in comparative designs. There are a variety of ways of conducting surveys. There is the traditional form, which is a direct administration of surveys. You come in and you pass out the surveys. Many of us have experienced it as we have completed a training where the facilitators are requesting feedback at the end of the session. We also at times receive surveys via the mail. We all know about being harassed at dinner time about telephone surveys. And at times, data are also collected through interviews. One of the challenges with interviews is that it traditionally required that the interviewer and the person being interviewed had to do some traveling. However, as we increasingly use technology, we can now facilitate interviews via Skype or other means. And you're also familiar with receiving surveys via email where there is a link and you then respond back. You click the link and you respond to it. Oftentimes, these email surveys involve a link to a web-based survey. Probably one of the ones that is best known is SurveyMonkey. On page 232 of your textbook, table 11.1 summarizes the characteristics and advantages and disadvantages of different types of research. There are several types of surveys. There are descriptive surveys, which are typically like a one-shot survey where we want to explore the perception of the experiences of the sample in the here and now. For instance, you might be an 11th grade science teacher who have taken your students on a 3-day survival trip to the Eastern Shore in Virginia, where everything, every food, everything that you have to use have to be carried in, and everything except for human waste has to be carried out again. And upon the return to civilization, you might say, you give the students a survey to explore their experiences during these 3 days. It might involve such questions about how tuned in they are to the environment, how difficult it was for them, etc., etc. Cross-sectional studies are also known as census studies because they set out, if possible, to get a snapshot of characteristics of an entire population. One of the most familiar ones that we know is the census that is being conducted in the US every so many years in order for us to get the best possible description about who we currently are in our nation. There are 3 types of longitudinal surveys or studies: trend studies, cohort studies, and panel studies. Trend studies follow the same group of the same sample that has been selected. You might, for instance, want to explore fifth graders' use of social networking. And we might want to do that over a 5-year period. So the trends that we are exploring is if there are changes in fifth graders. So we might pick the fifth graders in 2014, the fifth graders in the following year, and the fifth graders the next year. So that is a way of looking at trend studies. A cohort study follows the same population over a period of time. Let's now go back and use our example about the fifth graders' use of social networking media. So we use the same group of students or the same population of students, maybe in fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth and ninth grade. While we are using the same population, the people who are being surveyed each year might vary. So we might still use rambling. That's what I'm doing right now. We might use sampling strategies each year in order to sample students from the population. So in a sense, it is the same cohort, but the participants might be different. And finally, the last form of longitudinal panel is a panel study where we use the same group of people over a period of time. There are many types of surveys questions. One of the most common one is the demographic question that you see here, where we ask for people's gender. There are also attitudinal questions and knowledge questions where we tend to use these types of questions where it ranges from strongly agree to strongly disagree. We also use behavioral questions where we ask somebody about the frequency of them engaging in a certain types of behavior. In this example here, ranging from never to always. Sometimes we use closed-ended questions that are essentially a multiple choice format where we kind of force people into answering a specific questions. And we can also, like in this example here, that says, in which content areas are advanced placement courses offered in your school? So this is kind of a more of a checklist format. We also at times, as you know, use Likert types of questions where we respond to agree, disagree statement. There's a lot of debate about the number of points on a Likert scale, and also the question about if you should use even or uneven number of questions. The thinking about using an odd number of questions in a Likert type scale survey is that many people will tend to use the answer in the middle, and therefore you don't get a good interpretation about what people really, whether they really agree or disagree in this survey. There is an increasing number of data out there that suggests that a 7-point scale might be the best one because it has enough variation, because it has 3 points at either side of the midpoint, that fewer people actually select the midpoint. Here is another type of Likert type questions where you are using basically the same thing but ranging from not at all prepared to well prepared. And then you can use open-ended questions that allow for more individualized questions as stated here. So whenever you design a survey, we must really pay attention to the fact that we try to avoid collecting inaccurate data. One of the most challenging things is when we ourselves develop surveys, because many times we tend to not be clear about what we are really asking, and therefore I would highly recommend that if you were to use a homemade survey, that you pilot test it before you use it. Further, keep your questions short and straightforward. Avoid the double negatives. Emphasize critical words in the questions with appropriate formatting. I had a student in 2 semesters ago who asked questions of some second graders, and clearly the second graders did not understand the questions that were being asked. As always, be careful about using correct spelling and grammar. So, what is the process for survey research? As typical, it reminds you very much of any types of other research. You identify the topic, you review the literature, you identify the participants, you determine the mode of data collection, you draft the cover letter if it is an instrument that you're going to send out, you pilot test the instrument, you collect the data, you analyze the data, and then you answer the questions and you draw conclusions. Here is a reference to a number of related technology that you can find on the internet. Thank you.